I boarded early, not because I was eager, but because I like to see how people look at you before they know anything about you. Early boarding shows you the truth. There's no rush yet, no chaos to hide behind. Just quiet judgments forming in real time. First class smelled like leather, citrus wipes, and money that never had to explain itself. That familiar artificial calm airlines sell as luxury. I found my seat, 2A. Window. Wide legroom. The kind of seat people assume comes with a certain face, a certain age, a certain shade of confidence. I placed my carry-on in the overhead bin carefully. Not rushed. Not apologetic. Sat down, adjusted my jacket, and rested my hands on my thighs like I belonged there. Because I did. 25 years old. Black. Traveling alone. I'd learned early how those three facts make people uncomfortable when they exist together. I wasn't flashy. No jewelry screaming status. No designer logos begging for validation. Just clean shoes, pressed clothes, and a posture that said I didn't need permission. Still, I felt it. That weight in the air. That pause. A flight attendant walked past me once. Then again. Slower the second time. Her eyes flicked to the seat number, then back to my face, like she was double-checking a math problem that wasn't supposed to add up. I didn't look up immediately. I've learned that eye contact can feel like an invitation to people already planning to interrupt you. She stopped beside me. "Good afternoon, sir," she said, smiling too carefully. "Good afternoon," I replied, finally meeting her eyes. She nodded, as if confirming something internally, then walked on. Across the aisle, a white couple settled in easily. No second looks. No lingering stares. Just assumption. The most expensive thing in the world is being assumed to belong. I pulled out my phone, not because I needed it, but because it keeps people from feeling bold. Looking occupied makes you harder to challenge. It's a survival habit I picked up long before boardrooms and contracts. From classrooms. From stores. From places where standing still invited questions you shouldn't have to answer. The man 2 rows ahead adjusted his cufflinks like he'd been doing it his whole life. Gold. Subtle. Inherited confidence. Nobody questioned him. Why would they? I scrolled without reading. The engine hum filled the cabin. A soft, expensive quiet. The kind that pretends nothing ugly ever happens here. Then it happened. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just a hesitation in the air. The same flight attendant was back. This time she didn't walk past. She stood beside my seat, hands clasped, weight shifted slightly to one foot. That stance. People use it when they're about to ask something they've already decided the answer to. "Sir," she said gently, "may I speak with you for a moment?" I looked up slowly. Her smile tightened. "Of course," I said. I stood, smoothing my jacket. I noticed how her eyes flicked briefly to my hands, then away. A habit. An unconscious one. She gestured toward the aisle, already turning, already assuming I'd follow. And I did. As we stepped away from my seat, I caught sight of a man standing nearby. White. Mid-40s. Expensive watch. He wasn't angry. He was waiting. Calm. Certain. Like a man who never considered that a no might exist for him. That's when something shifted in my chest. Not anger yet. Recognition. I'd seen this posture before. In offices. In negotiations. In rooms where decisions were made quietly and enforced loudly. We stopped near the galley. Just far enough that the cabin couldn't hear words, but close enough they could feel something was happening. That special kind of silence people lean into when they sense power moving. "There's been a bit of a situation," she said, avoiding my eyes. I waited. She cleared her throat. "A passenger has raised a concern regarding seating." I said nothing. "We're going to need to move you to another seat." There it was. Clean. Simple. Final. "Why?" I asked calmly. She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "It's operational," she said. Operational. That word people use when the truth would sound ugly out loud. I glanced past her, down the aisle, back at my seat, already being claimed by someone who never once looked in my direction. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't about seats. This was about who they believed belonged in them. And they had decided, without asking me a single question, that I didn't. I nodded once. No problem, I said. Her shoulders dropped in relief. She had no idea what she just agreed to. They didn't ask. They decided. The moment I said, no problem, I felt it, the release in her posture, the subtle easing of her shoulders. People relax quickly when they think resistance is over. When they believe compliance has already been secured. She turned before I did, walking ahead of me toward my seat like the outcome was sealed. Like this was procedure, not judgment. I followed a step behind, my face neutral, my hands steady. Inside, something sharp had begun to form, but I kept it contained. Anger makes people sloppy. I wasn't about to give anyone that satisfaction. The cabin felt different now. Quieter. Thicker. People pretended to scroll, to sip, to adjust bags that didn't need adjusting. Nobody wanted to be involved, but everyone wanted to witness. That's how moments like this survive, on silence and curiosity. When we reached my row, the white man was already standing there. He didn't look at me. Not even once. His body was angled toward the seat, like proximity itself guaranteed ownership. The other flight attendant spoke to him softly, reassuringly, as if calming a child who'd been promised something. I stepped into the aisle and reached for my bag. The flight attendant waited, watching me gather my things. Not helping. Just watching. I could feel her eyes tracking every movement, my hands, my shoulders, the way I handled myself. People do that when they're afraid a situation might turn loud. It didn't. I lifted my bag overhead, slow and controlled, and slid it down without bumping anyone. I folded my jacket over my arm. Smoothed the seat once before stepping back, a habit I didn't even realize I had until that moment. Respect for spaces, even when they don't respect you back. As I moved aside, the man stepped forward and sat down. No acknowledgement. No hesitation. Just occupation. That was the part that stung, not the removal, but the ease with which my absence was accepted. Like the seat had always been waiting for him. Like I'd only been keeping it warm. Right this way, sir, the flight attendant said, already turning away from my row. Sir. Funny how the word changes weight depending on who it's spoken to. We walked down the aisle together. First class gave way to premium economy, then economy. Each step narrower than the last. Each row louder, tighter, more crowded. The luxury thinned out quickly when it was no longer meant for you. She stopped at a row near the back. Here we are, she said brightly. Middle seat. Of course it was. I looked at it for a second. The armrests already claimed by two strangers. Knees angled inward. No room to stretch. No privacy. Just compression. Is this seat comparable to the one I purchased? I asked. She shook her head slightly. We'll provide compensation. Later. Always later. I nodded and slid in, careful not to touch anyone. My shoulders brushed fabric and skin anyway. The man on my left glanced at me, then away. The woman on my right shifted her bag protectively. I buckled my seatbelt. That sound, click, felt louder than it should have. The flight attendant leaned in. Again, we apologize for the inconvenience. I looked up at her. Of course, I said. She walked away quickly. Around me, the cabin resumed its noise. Conversations restarted mid-sentence. Someone laughed too loudly, like they were trying to erase the tension with sound. The plane taxied forward. Life went on. That's the thing about public humiliation, it doesn't stop the world. It just isolates you inside it. I stared straight ahead as the plane lifted off. The pressure change pressed against my ears. I swallowed, equalizing. My chest felt tight, but not from fear. From recognition. I'd been here before. Not on a plane, but in rooms where people decided my limits without consulting me. Where assumptions moved faster than facts. Where my calm was mistaken for consent. A flight attendant passed by and muttered under her breath, "Some people always think they deserve more." She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. I exhaled slowly through my nose. That was the moment anger tried to rise. And that was the moment I pushed it down. Because anger would have been easy. Loud. Temporary. What I needed was clarity. I pulled my phone out, not to record, not to complain, not to vent. I didn't text anyone. I didn't post anything. I opened my notes. And I began writing. Time. Flight number. Seat reassignment. Crew interactions. Exact words used. Every detail. Because I wasn't going to win this with volume. I was going to win it with precision. As the plane leveled off, I felt the shift, not in altitude, but in myself. The humiliation was still there, sitting heavy in my stomach. But it had transformed. What they thought was compliance was actually permission for me to observe. And I was done being a passenger in their decisions. Anger makes noise. Power doesn't. I sat there, pressed between two strangers who pretended I didn't exist, and let the engine's hum do what it does best, drown out emotion long enough for thought to take over. The seat was narrow, the armrests unforgiving, my knees angled just enough to remind me this space was never designed for comfort. Not for me, anyway. Around me, people settled into their distractions. Headphones on. Screens lit. Drinks poured. The cabin exhaled as if nothing significant had happened. That's how these moments survive, wrapped in normalcy, buried under routine. My heart was still racing, but my face was calm. I'd practiced that face since I was a kid. The one that keeps adults from saying you're too aggressive. The one that reassures authority you're manageable. Non-threatening. It's a strange skill, learning how to disappear while still being present. A flight attendant walked by and avoided my row completely, eyes fixed straight ahead like I'd turned invisible the moment I sat down. Another slowed briefly, glanced at my seatbelt, then moved on without a word. No water. No check-in. Just quiet avoidance. That told me more than any apology could have. I looked down at my phone again, not to escape, but to anchor myself. My notes were already open. I added more details. Tone of voice. Order of events. Witnesses. Not because I wanted revenge yet, but because I wanted truth. Clean. Undeniable. Written while memory was still sharp and adrenaline hadn't blurred anything. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement. The original flight attendant was standing near the galley, speaking in low tones with another crew member. Their heads leaned in. Eyes flicked toward me, then away. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the energy. The recalculation stage. The part where people start realizing something might not be as simple as they thought. Good. A voice from behind me muttered. That was messed up. I didn't turn around. Another voice answered quietly. Just mind your business. There it was again. Silence protecting convenience. The woman beside me shifted, clearing her throat. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, not looking at me. That wasn't right. I turned slightly. She looked uncomfortable, guilty, like she'd borrowed shame from a situation she didn't cause but couldn't ignore. Thank you, I said. That was all. She nodded and stared straight ahead, relieved the interaction hadn't demanded more of her. I leaned back as much as the seat allowed and closed my eyes briefly. Not to sleep, but to remember. I remembered being 16, standing in a store while security trailed me aisle to aisle. I remembered being 19, sitting in a classroom where a professor praised my articulation, like it was unexpected. I remembered being 22, in my first serious meeting, watching someone repeat my idea 5 minutes later and get applauded for it. Different places. Same pattern. This wasn't about one flight. It never is. It's about who people feel comfortable inconveniencing. Who they expect to accept it quietly. The seatbelt sign chimed off. The plane steadied. Drinks began moving down the aisle. Laughter bubbled up somewhere ahead. And I realized something important. Nobody thought this would go any further. In their minds, the moment had already ended. A minor adjustment. An inconvenience. A man moved. Problem solved. They had no idea this was the beginning. I opened my phone again, not to add notes this time, but to confirm something I already knew. My inbox loaded slowly. Spotty connection. Enough. There it was. An old email thread. Months old. A subject line most people would have ignored. I didn't open it yet. I let it sit on the screen, reminding myself to stay patient. To stay quiet. To stay exact. A flight attendant stopped at the row across from me, laughing softly with a passenger. She glanced my way, caught my eye for half a second, then looked away too fast. The laughter faded. Fear always arrives before accountability. I felt the anger again, hot, quick, tempting. I let it pass. Because anger would have given them a story. Silence was giving me leverage. I added one last line to my notes. Crew believes incident resolved. Then I locked my phone and stared forward, my reflection faint in the darkened screen of the seat in front of me. They thought removing me from first class was the end of it. They didn't know silence was how I prepare. And they had no idea what I was about to remember next. It wasn't a mistake. It was practice. That realization didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like a truth my body recognized before my mind was ready to admit it. I'd been sitting there long enough now to see past the incident itself and into the behavior surrounding it, the way the crew moved, the way their attention curved around me instead of toward me. This wasn't panic. This was familiarity. I watched the aisle like it was a mirror. A senior flight attendant moved through the cabin with practiced ease, smiling at passengers she knew wouldn't challenge her. Her tone shifted depending on the face in front of her. Warm here. Brisk there. Polite but distant when she passed my row, like acknowledging me too directly might reopen something she'd already decided was closed. That's when it hit me. If this had been a genuine operational issue, overbooking, equipment change, anything legitimate, there would have been protocol. A supervisor. An explanation offered without hesitation. Instead, what I'd gotten was improvisation disguised as confidence. They didn't follow rules. They followed instinct. And instinct told them I was the safest person to move. I leaned back slightly and stretched my legs as much as the space allowed, ignoring the discomfort. Around me, people sipped drinks, watched movies, laughed at jokes on screens they'd forget in an hour. Comfort has a way of dulling curiosity. The younger crew member, the one who'd hovered earlier, walked past again. This time slower. His eyes flicked to my face, then down to my seat number, then away. His jaw tightened, just a little. Recognition was catching up to him. Good. Because recognition always changes behavior. I opened my phone again, pretending to scroll, but really watching reflections in the dark glass. The galley was busy now. Whispers. Low voices. Someone shook their head. Another person shrugged, the universal gesture for it's done now. I added another note. Crew treating incident as routine. Routine is dangerous. It means repetition. It means confidence built on the absence of consequence. That's when I noticed the name badge. She passed my row quickly, but not fast enough. The original flight attendant. The one who'd asked me to step aside like it was nothing. Her badge swung slightly as she walked. Clear letters. Clear name. I memorized it without effort. Some things stick when they need to. A man across the aisle leaned toward his travel partner and whispered something. She frowned and shook her head. Their eyes slid toward me briefly, then away. Curiosity without courage. That's when the younger crew member finally stopped beside my row. Sir, he said quietly, too quietly. Can I get you anything? It was the first time anyone had addressed me directly since I sat down. No, I replied, meeting his eyes. I'm fine. He nodded but didn't move. There it was again, that pause. The moment when someone realizes the story they told themselves might be missing chapters. "I'm sorry about earlier," he said. "That shouldn't have happened like that." I studied his face. He wasn't apologizing for policy. He was apologizing for recognition. For the feeling that he just stepped onto unstable ground. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear exactly. More like calculation. He nodded once and walked away, his steps quicker now, less confident. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't about punishing individuals. It never is. It's about exposing systems that rely on silence and assumptions to function. I thought back to other moments. Other rooms. Other times people had mistaken my restraint for weakness. How often silence is misread as surrender when it's really preparation. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Afternoon blurred toward evening. The flight smoothed out. And I felt it settle fully in my chest now, solid A. "Thank you," I said. He swallowed. "If there's anything we can do." I raised my hand slightly. Not dismissive. Controlled. "I'll let you know." That did it. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear exactly. More like calculation. He nodded once and walked away, his steps quicker now, less confident. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't about punishing individuals. It never is. It's about exposing systems that rely on silence and assumptions to function. I thought back to other moments. Other rooms. Other times people had mistaken my restraint for weakness. How often silence is misread as surrender when it's really preparation. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. Afternoon blurred toward evening. The flight smoothed out. And I felt it settle fully in my chest now, solid and unmistakable. This crew didn't act because one passenger complained. They acted because they believed I wouldn't. They believed I'd accept inconvenience quietly, swallow the insult, and disappear into my assigned space. They believed wrong. I unlocked my phone again and this time opened the email thread I'd been avoiding. Read it carefully. Slowly. Letting each line confirm what I already knew. Connection. Authority. Leverage. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I just closed the email and locked my screen. Because now I was certain. This wasn't an accident. It was a pattern. And patterns don't stop on their own. Systems only protect the people who know how to use them. I'd learned that lesson long before this flight, long before the cabin lights dimmed and the world outside shrank into clouds and blue silence. Systems don't care about feelings. They don't care about intent. They care about process. About records. About whether someone followed the rules they agreed to uphold. And as I sat there, cramped and overlooked, I realized something almost funny. They hadn't. I opened my phone again, this time with purpose. The Wi-Fi connection blinked on and off, but I didn't need much bandwidth, just enough to load text. I pulled up the airline's publicly available service charter. Then their customer commitment. Then the internal-facing policies I knew most passengers never saw, buried behind PDFs and legal language. Clear. Unambiguous. Seat reassignment in a premium cabin required documented cause. Compensation issued immediately. Supervisor approval logged in the system. None of that had happened. What they'd done instead was rely on social shortcuts, the same ones people use when they think they know who will push back and who won't. The same shortcuts that save time and protect comfort until they collide with someone who understands structure better than emotion. I scrolled slowly, copying clause numbers into my notes. Not to threaten anyone. Not yet. Just to make sure my memory stayed sharp. A shadow fell across my row. "Sir?" I looked up. A different flight attendant this time. Older. More polished. The kind of woman who'd been in this job long enough to recognize when the air changes. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked. Her tone was careful. Measured. "No, thank you," I said. She hesitated. "We're very sorry about the inconvenience earlier." Inconvenience. It's the word people use when harm feels too heavy to name. "I understand," I replied. She nodded, but her eyes searched my face, like she was trying to read how much trouble they were actually in. She didn't find anything. That made her nervous. As she walked away, I noticed how the energy around me had shifted. Crew members passed my row more slowly now. Conversations in the galley dropped in volume when I glanced up. The younger crew member avoided eye contact entirely. Recognition was spreading. But still, no one had asked the right questions. Because they assumed the worst was already over. I glanced at my phone again and saw a notification load. Not a message. A calendar reminder I'd forgotten was there. Something scheduled for the following week. Something connected to this airline in a way most people would never guess. I closed it immediately. Too early. A few rows ahead, the white passenger who'd taken my seat laughed loudly at something on his screen. His comfort was complete. His confidence untouched. He had no idea how temporary that feeling was. The original flight attendant approached my row again, slower this time. Her posture was different. Shoulders tense. Smile thinner. "Sir," she said, "I just wanted to check in." I waited. "We'll be issuing you compensation for the seating change," she added quickly. "And if you'd like, we can move you back to first class." There it was. The undo button. The thing people offer when they realize a decision might carry weight. I looked at her for a moment, really looked. At the strain behind her eyes. The calculation. The hope that restoring my seat would restore control. "No," I said gently. "I'm fine where I am." Her smile froze. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded too fast. "Of course. Please let us know if you need anything." She turned and walked away, her steps quick, almost clipped. I exhaled through my nose. They were trying to fix the surface without acknowledging the foundation. And that never works. I added another line to my notes. Attempted quiet resolution without accountability. Then I locked my phone and leaned back as far as the seat would allow. I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt steady. Because once people start backtracking, it means they've realized something important. They've lost control of the narrative. And the moment that happens, systems start to speak louder than excuses. Somewhere near the galley, a hushed argument broke out. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Tone carries more truth than language ever will. I closed my eyes briefly, not to rest, but to prepare. Because the next step wasn't confrontation. It was timing. And timing, when paired with rules people forgot to read, has a way of ending conversations permanently. Respect always shows up late. It arrived quietly, not with an announcement or apology, but with a shift in movement. The kind you only notice if you're paying attention. The kind that tells you the room has realized something it can't unlearn. I felt it before I saw it. Crew members started moving with intention now. Less casual. Less relaxed. Conversations in the galley stopped when I looked up. One of them glanced down the aisle toward the cockpit, then back at me, like they were measuring distance instead of space. Fear doesn't always look like panic. Sometimes it looks like professionalism turned stiff. I sat there, hands folded, posture easy. The hardest thing to do when people expect reaction is to deny them one. Silence keeps them guessing. Guessing makes people reveal more than words ever could. The younger crew member, the one who'd almost recognized me earlier, hovered near my row again. This time he didn't pretend it was routine. "Sir," he said quietly, leaning just enough that others couldn't hear. "Can I ask you something?" I met his eyes. "Yes." He swallowed. "Are you associated with the airline?" That was the moment. The exact second when the floor under him shifted. I didn't smile. I didn't confirm or deny. I tilted my head slightly, like I was considering how much truth he was ready to carry. "Why do you ask?" I said. His mouth opened, then closed again. He glanced toward the galley. Toward the front. Toward the cockpit. He stopped himself. "I'm sorry," he said instead. "I shouldn't have asked?" "No," I replied calmly. You should have asked sooner. That did it. He nodded once, sharp and nervous, then walked away faster than he meant to. I watched his back straighten as he passed other crew members, the way people do when they're trying to look normal while their thoughts are spiraling. 2 minutes later, the original flight attendant returned. This time, her hands were shaking. Sir, she said, voice tight, would you mind remaining seated for a moment? I looked around. The seatbelt sign was off. People were moving freely. For what reason? I asked. She licked her lips. The captain has been informed of the situation. Informed. Not will be. Not soon. Already done. That was new. I'm not going anywhere, I said. She nodded quickly. Thank you. She didn't leave right away. Hovered. Hesitated. Like she wanted to say something else but didn't know how. Is there anything we can do to make this right? She asked finally. I considered the question. Not emotionally. Structurally. Not right now, I said. Her face fell, not in disappointment, but in understanding. The kind that comes when you realize the window to fix something quietly has already closed. She stepped back. Around us, the cabin felt suspended. Conversations had dulled. Laughter died mid-sentence. People sensed something was happening even if they didn't know what. That's how authority works. You feel it before you see it. My phone buzzed once. I didn't look at it immediately. I waited. Let the moment stretch. Let them sit in uncertainty the way I'd been forced to earlier. Then I unlocked the screen. One missed call. One voicemail. I didn't listen yet. Instead, I stood up, not abruptly, not dramatically. Just enough to adjust my posture, stretch my back, remind myself I wasn't trapped. The flight attendant flinched. I'm just stretching, I said calmly. She nodded, embarrassed. I sat back down and finally opened the voicemail. It was brief. Professional. Direct. We're aware. Don't worry. Handle it how you see fit. No questions. No panic. Just trust. I closed the message and locked my phone. That was when I noticed it, the shift in hierarchy. Crew members now avoided my row not out of indifference, but out of caution. Like I'd become a boundary they didn't know how to cross safely. The younger crew member stood near the galley, hands clasped behind his back, staring at nothing. Another whispered something to him. He shook his head slowly. The white passenger in my old seat glanced back for the first time. Our eyes met. He looked away immediately. Funny how confidence evaporates when it realizes it was borrowed. I leaned back, finally allowing myself a slow breath. They felt it now. Not the anger. Not the humiliation. The weight of consequences moving toward them, quietly, officially, and without emotion. And the thing about consequences is this. Once they start moving, they don't need permission to arrive. They thought power had a look. Older. Louder. Wider. They thought it arrived with entourage and arrogance, with expensive suits and raised voices. They thought authority announced itself early so it wouldn't be questioned later. That assumption had always worked in my favor. I stayed seated while the cabin sat in a strange limbo, half calm, half waiting. Nobody spoke above a murmur now. Even the engines sounded quieter, like the plane itself was listening. The captain hadn't come back yet. That mattered. Because captains don't get involved unless something has crossed from customer service into liability. I thought back to the first time I'd ever been underestimated in a room that mattered. I was 22, fresh-faced, quiet, the youngest person at the table by at least a decade. They'd spoken around me, not to me. Made decisions assuming I was there to observe, not influence. I'd let them. And then I'd dismantled their plan with 3 questions they hadn't prepared for. This felt the same. The younger crew member paced near the galley now, checking his watch, adjusting his collar, running a hand through his hair like he couldn't get comfortable in his own skin anymore. He caught my eye once, flinched, then looked away. I wasn't threatening him. I was reflecting something back to him, consequences. My phone buzzed again. This time I didn't wait. A message. Legal has the incident logged. Names already pulled. I exhaled slowly. Not relief. Completion. The original flight attendant stood a few rows ahead, whispering urgently to a senior colleague. Her hands moved as she spoke too fast, betraying her nerves. She glanced at me mid-sentence. The color drained from her face. She knew now. Not who I was exactly, but what I represented. And that was enough. I typed one sentence and hit send. Proceed. That was it. No speech. No explanation. Just permission. I leaned back and let my head rest against the seat, eyes open, watching the cabin like a chessboard where the pieces had finally realized the game wasn't casual. A voice came over the intercom. Not the usual cheerful cadence. Lower. Controlled. Flight crew, please report to the galley. Not all of them. Just some. That detail mattered. The younger crew member froze. The original flight attendant's shoulders sagged like she'd just dropped something heavy she'd been pretending wasn't there. Two others exchanged looks before standing, smoothing their uniforms like fabric could protect them. They walked forward quietly. Passengers noticed now. Heads lifted. Screens paused. Whispers bloomed and died just as quickly. Nobody knew the story, but everyone felt the shift. The white passenger in my former seat twisted around again, openly staring this time. His brow furrowed, confusion replacing comfort. He didn't recognize me. That was the point. Power isn't about being known. It's about being unavoidable. Minutes passed. Long ones? The kind that stretch when people are alone with their thoughts. I didn't check my phone again. Didn't need to. Everything that needed to happen was already moving without me. Finally, footsteps. The captain appeared, not rushing, not angry. Just present. Authority distilled into posture and silence. He didn't look at me right away. He spoke to the remaining crew first, low and firm. Instructions. Assignments. Replacements. Then, only then, did he turn toward my row. He didn't apologize. He nodded. A single, respectful nod. I returned it. Nothing else needed to be said. The original flight attendant was escorted past me moments later. She didn't look up. Couldn't. The weight of the cabin pressed down on her now the way it had pressed on me earlier. Difference was, I hadn't deserved it. She did. The captain's voice returned over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We've addressed an internal matter and will be continuing shortly. Internal. The word landed differently now. I closed my eyes for the first time since boarding, not to escape, but to release something I'd been carrying longer than this flight. Years of swallowing moments like this. Of choosing silence because noise felt unsafe. Today, silence had been deliberate. Strategic. Final. They removed me from first class thinking I wouldn't fight back. They didn't know the truth. I never needed to raise my voice. I just needed to let them realize who they were talking to. After it was already too late. The man you embarrassed owns the silence you're standing in. The plane felt suspended, not just in the air, but in time. The kind of pause that happens when people sense a conclusion forming but don't yet know who it will favor. The aisle stayed clear. The galley quiet. Even the engines seemed to hum at a lower register, like they were waiting for permission to continue. I stayed seated. Economy class. Where they put me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Power has a way of revealing itself in the spaces people try to shrink you into. I'd learned that early. The smaller the box, the clearer the leverage when it finally unfolds. The captain didn't make a show of it. No announcement. No pointing. He spoke quietly to the remaining crew near the galley, handing off instructions with the calm efficiency of someone used to being obeyed. 2 crew members nodded and moved to new positions. Another disappeared toward the cockpit. Then he turned, subtly, deliberately, and walked down the aisle. Toward me. The cabin noticed. You could feel the attention tilt. Heads lifted. Screens dimmed. The soft murmur of conversation thinned to nothing. When authority walks with purpose, people feel it before they understand it. He stopped beside my row. Not in front of me. Beside me. "Sir," he said, low enough that only I could hear. "Thank you for your patience." No apology. No defense. Respect. "That won't be necessary," I replied. He studied my face for half a second, long enough to confirm what he already knew. Then he nodded once. "We'll handle the rest," he said. And just like that, the truth settled into the cabin like a pressure change. The younger crew member stood frozen near the galley, eyes wide, color gone from his face. He finally understood what recognition had been trying to tell him earlier. The original flight attendant was nowhere to be seen now, already removed from the equation, processed by systems that move faster once permission is granted. Across the aisle, the white passenger in my former seat shifted uncomfortably. He looked from the captain to me and back again, confusion tightening his mouth. For the first time since boarding, he seemed unsure of his surroundings. He leaned toward the flight attendant nearby. Whispered something. She didn't answer. That silence? That was mine. My phone buzzed again. This time I didn't hesitate. A single message appeared. Crew relieved of duty. Interim team assigned. Legal documenting. You're clear. Clear. I locked the phone and slid it back into my pocket, hands steady, breath slow. I didn't feel triumph. I felt alignment. Like something that had been crooked for too long had finally snapped back into place. The captain addressed the cabin then. Calm. Controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've resolved an internal staffing matter. Thank you for your understanding." Staffing matter. That's how power talks when it doesn't need validation. No one asked questions. No one challenged it. People returned to their screens, their drinks, their small conversations, relieved the tension had passed without touching them. That's how privilege works too. The plane resumed its rhythm. Beverage carts rolled again. A different crew member passed my row and offered water. Her hands were steady. Her eyes respectful. I accepted the glass. As she walked away, the younger crew member caught my eye one last time. There was no confusion now. Just a quiet understanding. He nodded, barely perceptible. I returned it. Not forgiveness. Closure. The white passenger never looked back again. He stared straight ahead, shoulders tight, like a man suddenly aware that comfort isn't permanent, just borrowed. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, watching the light panels glow softly overhead. They had removed me from first class thinking I was the least risky choice. They had no idea I wasn't just another passenger navigating the system. I was part of the system. And systems don't need to argue. They just execute. Quietly. Revenge doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it arrives wearing policy language and neutral expressions, carried out by people who weren't in the room when the mistake was made, but who now own the responsibility of correcting it. The plane moved again, smooth and steady, like nothing unusual had happened. That was the strange part. The world didn't pause for justice. It adjusted around it. A new crew worked the aisles now. Different faces. Different energy. Less casual, more deliberate. They followed protocol to the letter, not out of fear, but awareness. Awareness changes everything. I watched them quietly, the same way I'd watched the others earlier. The contrast was obvious. No whispers. No side glances. No selective warmth. Just consistency. Professionalism done right looks boring. That's how you know it's real. A tablet appeared in a crew member's hand near the galley. Notes were being taken. Names logged. Timestamps confirmed. Not because I demanded it, but because systems, once activated, don't stop at surface fixes. They go deep. They trace patterns. They ask uncomfortable questions. That's where real consequences live. The captain passed through once more, this time without stopping. No nod. No acknowledgement. We'd already exchanged everything that needed to be said. Anything more would have been performance, and this wasn't that kind of moment. The white passenger in my former seat finally stood, stretching like he was trying to shake something off. He avoided eye contact with everyone now, especially me. I caught his reflection briefly in the dark window, jaw tight, eyes unsettled. He'd gotten what he wanted. He just didn't get to keep the illusion that came with it. A flight attendant stopped at my row again. Not the apologetic kind. Not the nervous kind. The competent kind. "Sir," she said, "would you like to move to first class now? The seat is available." I looked at the empty space in front of me. Imagined it. The wider legroom. The quiet. The symbolic reversal. Then I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm fine." She paused, surprised, but didn't question it. Just nodded. Understood. That mattered. I didn't need the seat back to prove anything. Taking it now would have been about optics. About restoring an image. I wasn't here for restoration. I was here for correction. My phone buzzed softly, another update. Internal. Procedural. Names crossed off schedules. Mandatory reviews triggered. Training audits scheduled. Not firing screamed into microphones. Removals handled by record. That's the kind that lasts. I thought about the original flight attendant, the ease with which she'd made the decision to move me. How light it must have felt in the moment. How safe. How ordinary. I wondered how heavy it felt now. Not with shame, but with realization. The kind that follows you home. The kind that makes you replay a moment again and again, wishing you'd chosen differently. That was enough. I didn't need her ruined. I needed her aware. The cabin settled fully now. People slept. Movies played. Drinks were refilled. Life reclaimed its rhythm. And I sat there, steady, feeling something unexpected. Peace. Not because I'd won. But because I hadn't lost myself in the process. No yelling. No threats. No spectacle. Just truth, aligned with structure, allowed to do its work. As the plane began its descent, the lights dimmed further. A quiet announcement floated through the cabin about arrival time and weather. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not to rest, but to release. This wasn't about ego. It never was. It was about reminding a system that dignity isn't optional, and silence doesn't mean surrender. And when the wheels touched down, smooth and controlled, I knew one thing for certain. They would remember this flight. Not because of me, but because of what happened the moment they assumed I didn't matter. They'll tell this story for the rest of their lives. Not loudly. Not proudly. But carefully, edited, softened, wrapped in words like miscommunication and unfortunate oversight. That's how people survive moments that force them to confront who they were when no one was watching. The plane rolled to the gate with a gentle shudder, like it had exhaled after holding something heavy for too long. Applause scattered through the cabin, uneven and distracted. People gathered their things, already mentally somewhere else. That's how endings usually go, quietly ignored by those who weren't changed by them. I stood when my row cleared. Same posture I'd had all flight. Same calm. No one stopped me. No one questioned me. The aisle felt wider now. Or maybe I did. As I stepped forward, I passed the galley where the new crew stood in clean formation, professional and composed. One of them met my eyes and nodded, not out of fear or obligation, but recognition. The kind that says I see you without needing to say anything else. I nodded back. That exchange mattered more than any apology. The jet bridge connected with a soft thud. The doors opened. Daylight spilled in. People shuffled forward, impatient to reclaim their schedules. A woman behind me complained quietly about a delay. A man checked his phone and sighed. Life rushing back in. I paused just before exiting the aircraft, not to make a statement, but to take inventory. I thought about the younger crew member. The moment his certainty cracked. How quickly the truth had rearranged his understanding of power. I hoped he remembered that feeling, not as fear, but as awareness. I thought about the original flight attendant. How easily she'd chosen convenience over dignity. I didn't hate her. Hate would have made this about emotion. What I wanted, what mattered, was that she never made that choice so casually again. And I thought about myself. The younger version of me who would have argued, who would have raised his voice trying to prove something to people invested in misunderstanding him, who would have left angry and replayed the moment for weeks, letting it live rent-free in his chest. That man didn't board this flight. I stepped off the plane. The terminal smelled like coffee and recycled air. Announcements echoed overhead. Rolling bags hummed against tile. Everything looked ordinary. That was the point. Power doesn't need witnesses. As I walked toward baggage claim, my phone buzzed one last time. A final update. Administrative. Confirmations completed. Follow-up scheduled. I didn't respond. I slipped the phone into my pocket and kept walking. People passed me without a second look. No one knew what had happened 30 minutes earlier. No one needed to. My victory wasn't meant to be consumed. It was meant to be absorbed. Outside the terminal, the air was cooler. Evening lights stretched long shadows across the pavement. I took a breath and felt it, something solid settling where anger used to live. Dignity restored. Not because I demanded it, but because I refused to abandon it. They removed me from first class thinking I'd accept the message they were sending. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought compliance meant permission. They didn't know silence could be strategic. They didn't know patience could be dangerous. And they didn't know the man they tried to move out of sight understood systems well enough to let them correct themselves. Quietly.